The infrared strobe blinked once every 3 seconds in the Afghan darkness, invisible to everything except American night vision. SEAL Team 6 had placed it exactly where the briefing demanded, at the northern edge of a dirt strip that barely qualified as a runway. Built for surveillance drones and emergency resupply drops, the landing zone stretched only 800 meters through a valley that shouldn't exist on any map worth trusting. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reaper Kowalski pressed his eye to the spotting scope, watching the strobe pulse like a mechanical heartbeat. Behind him, his team of 4 SEALs maintained defensive positions in the rocks, their rifles trained on the ridgelines where Taliban fighters had been moving ghost-like through the shadows for the past 6 hours. The mission brief had been simple: secure the LZ, guide in a single MQ-9 Reaper drone for emergency maintenance, then extract before dawn. What they hadn't expected was the low rumble now growing in the distance. "Reaper, you getting this?" Petty Officer Williams whispered into his radio, voice tight with confusion. The sound wasn't the high-pitched whine of a drone's turbofan engine. It was deeper, heavier, something that belonged to an aircraft with serious weight behind it. Kowalski adjusted his scope, scanning the star-filled sky above the Hindu Kush Mountains. The rumble grew louder, more distinct, until there was no mistaking what approached their position. 4 turboprop engines, the unmistakable bass note of a Lockheed C-130 Hercules transport aircraft. "Base, this is Reaper 6, Kowalski transmitted, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his stomach. "We have unscheduled air traffic inbound. Say again, we have a C-130 approaching our position. This was supposed to be a drone op." Static filled his earpiece for 10 long seconds. When the reply came, it carried the weight of confusion from someone sitting in a command bunker 300 miles away. "Reaper 6 base. Negative on any scheduled C-130 traffic in your area. Are you certain of aircraft identification?" The sound grew thunderous now, echoing off the valley walls. Kowalski could feel the vibration in his chest, the way only large aircraft created when they dropped low enough to matter. He swept his scope across the sky until he found it. Navigation lights blinking in formation, the distinctive silhouette of a Hercules transport plane descending toward their impossibly small landing zone. "Base, this is definite. We have a C-130 on final approach to our LZ. Pilots either lost or crazy." Kowalski paused, watching the massive aircraft line up with their tiny dirt strip. "Maybe both." The infrared strobe continued its rhythm, marking a runway that had never been designed for anything larger than a pickup truck. And somehow, impossibly, a C-130 was about to attempt landing on it. In the cockpit of the descending Hercules, Captain Zara Phoenix Okafor gripped the yoke with hands that had learned precision through fire and determination. Her dark eyes scanned the instruments with the focus of someone who had survived 2 tours in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan. Someone who had earned her wings when half the Air Force still believed women belonged anywhere, except behind the controls of military aircraft. "Phoenix, you're insane," came the voice of her co-pilot, Captain Bradley Torch Harrison, his knuckles white as he watched the altimeter spin downward. "That's not a runway down there. That's a goat path with delusions of grandeur." Okafor didn't respond immediately. Her attention was locked on the GPS coordinates that had been uploaded to their flight management system 18 minutes ago, overriding their original destination and flight plan with the authority of someone very high up the chain of command. The coordinates led here, to this valley that officially didn't exist, to this landing strip that was barely worthy of the name. "Base, this is Phoenix 27 requesting permission to abort approach," Harrison transmitted without consulting his aircraft commander. "Landing zone appears unsuitable for C-130 operations." "Negative, Phoenix 27. The reply came from a voice neither pilot recognized, calm and authoritative. "You are directed to complete landing as filed. Pattern is clear." Okafor finally spoke, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had seen her through 13 combat deployments. Torch, check the cargo manifest again. What exactly are we carrying that's worth risking a $40 million aircraft? Harrison's fingers danced across his tablet, scrolling through the cargo documentation that had been sealed until 30 minutes into their flight. What he found made him pause, then read again more carefully. Phoenix, according to this, were carrying medical supplies and communications equipment. Standard humanitarian relief package, maybe 3,000 pounds total. He looked up from the screen, confusion evident in his expression. This doesn't make sense. You don't risk a C-130 crew for a load that could fit in a Black Hawk. Below them, the SEAL team watched the massive aircraft descend through the thin mountain air. The C-130's landing lights blazed like fallen stars, illuminating the rocky terrain and making their night vision equipment useless. Kowalski ordered his men to switch to iron sights and maintain overwatch positions. Phoenix 2-7, this is Reaper 6 on guard frequency, Kowalski transmitted on the emergency channel. Be advised, your landing zone is 800 meters of unimproved dirt. Recommend you find somewhere else to park that bird. Okafor keyed her radio. Reaper 6, Phoenix 2-7, understand the limitations. We're committed to landing. There was something in her voice that made Kowalski respect her immediately, even as he questioned her sanity. The C-130 descended through 2,000 feet above ground level. Its 4 Allison T-56 turboprop engines throttled back but still producing enough thrust to scatter dust devils across the valley floor. Okafor had calculated the approach angle 3 times, adjusting for the thin air at 7,000 feet elevation and the significant headwind coming down from the peaks. Flaps to landing configuration, she ordered. Flaps set, Harrison confirmed, though his voice carried doubt like a prayer. Gear down. Gear down and locked. The massive main landing gear descended from the aircraft's belly, followed by the nose wheel. Each wheel was designed to absorb the impact of combat landings on austere airfields, but nothing in their engineering specifications had anticipated a dirt strip this short or this rough. Airspeed 120 knots, Harrison called out, 500 feet above ground level. Okafor could see the details of the landing zone now. Rocks scattered across the approach end, a slight upward slope that would help with braking, and tire tracks from previous drone operations that marked the centerline of their intended runway. She had landed C-130s in worse conditions, but never with such significant questions about why she was doing it. The SEAL team maintained their security perimeter as the aircraft's shadow passed overhead. Williams tracked the ridgelines through his rifle scope, watching for muzzle flashes or movement that might indicate Taliban fighters were using the distraction to close their position. The sound of the approaching C-130 would carry for miles in the thin mountain air, advertising their location to anyone within 20 kilometers. Movement on the South Ridge, Williams reported quietly. Could be goats, could be something else. Stay sharp, Kowalski replied, his attention divided between potential threats and the controlled crash he was about to witness. Okafor brought the C-130 over the threshold at exactly the right airspeed, her peripheral vision tracking the aircraft's position relative to the narrow dirt strip. The main gear touched down with a jarring impact that sent vibrations through the entire airframe, followed immediately by the nose wheel slamming into the uneven ground. Reverse thrust maximum, she commanded. Harrison's hands flew to the power levers, pulling them into the reverse position. The 4 turboprop engines screamed as their blades changed pitch, creating a wall of sound that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Dust and small rocks erupted behind the aircraft in a brown cloud that obscured everything beyond 50 meters. Okafor stood on the brakes, feeling the anti-skid system cycling as the wheels fought for traction on the loose dirt surface. The C-130 decelerated rapidly, its massive weight working against the laws of physics in a contest that would be decided within the next 30 seconds. Through the swirling dust, the SEAL team watched the aircraft slow, then stop, then begin taxiing toward the northern end of the improvised runway. Somehow, impossibly, Captain Zara Phoenix Ackaffer had just landed a C-130 Hercules on a dirt strip designed for drones. In the sudden silence that followed engine shutdown, Kowalski could hear his own heartbeat. Around him, his team maintained their defensive positions while trying to process what they had just witnessed. The C-130 sat motionless in the darkness, its bulk incongruous against the harsh landscape of the Afghan mountains. Reaper 6, Phoenix 27, Ackaffer's voice came through the radio, calm and professional. Aircraft secure on deck. Request permission to begin cargo offload. Kowalski looked at the massive transport aircraft, then at the sealed orders in his pocket that had suddenly become relevant. The mission brief had mentioned a possible special delivery, but no one had explained that it would arrive via controlled crash landing. Phoenix 27, Reaper 6, permission granted, will provide security during your ground operations. As the cargo ramp lowered with a hydraulic whine, revealing the shadowy interior of the aircraft, Kowalski began to understand that nothing about this mission had been routine from the beginning. The question was no longer how Ackaffer had managed to land a C-130 on an impossible runway. The question was why someone had ordered her to do it. The first person to emerge from the C-130's cargo bay wasn't wearing a flight suit or military uniform. Instead, she wore civilian clothes and carried herself with the purposeful movement of someone accustomed to operating in dangerous places. Dr. Elena Vasquez, according to the identification she showed Kowalski, though her credentials raised more questions than they answered. "Sergeant, I need your team to establish a 200-meter perimeter," she said without preamble. "We have approximately 90 minutes to complete our mission before this location becomes untenable." Kowalski studied her face in the green glow of his night vision. Mid-40s, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and an accent that suggested education in American universities but origins somewhere in South America. More importantly, she spoke like someone accustomed to giving orders to special operations personnel. "Ma'am, with respect, I need to see some documentation that explains who you are and what authority you're operating under." Dr. Vasquez handed him a sealed envelope bearing markings that made his blood pressure spike. The authorization came from Joint Special Operations Command with validation codes that were updated daily. Whatever she was doing here had been approved at levels that didn't normally concern themselves with SEAL team operations. "The cargo we're offloading contains sensitive equipment that requires specific environmental conditions," she continued, while Kowalski processed the implications of her credentials. "Captain Ackaffer's crew will assist with transportation to the installation site." "Installation site?" Kowalski questioned. "Ma'am, this is a temporary LZ. We're scheduled for extraction in 6 hours." "Plans change, Sergeant." Behind Dr. Vasquez, Captain Ackaffer appeared at the base of the cargo ramp, having completed her post-flight inspection. She had removed her helmet, revealing closely cropped black hair and the kind of focused expression that came from executing a near-impossible mission successfully. "Phoenix, nice flying," Kowalski offered, genuine admiration in his voice. "Thank you, Sergeant. Though I'm not sure flying is the right word for what just happened. That was more like controlled falling with style." Despite the tension of their situation, Kowalski found himself smiling. He liked pilots who could acknowledge reality while getting the job done. The cargo bay of the C-130 contained equipment that didn't match any standard humanitarian relief package. Instead of medical supplies and communications gear, Kowalski could see metallic cases marked with radiation symbols and handling instructions that required security clearances he didn't possess. "Dr. Vasquez," he said carefully, "I think there might have been some confusion about our mission parameters." The woman turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "Sergeant, what do you know about the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan?" "Enough to know it ended badly for them. What you probably don't know is that they left behind certain assets that have recently come to our attention, assets that pose a significant threat if they fall into the wrong hands." Kowalski felt the familiar weight of operational reality settling on his shoulders. The mission brief had been deliberately vague, providing only essential information for establishing the landing zone. Now, he was beginning to understand why his team had been ordered to this particular valley, and why someone had been willing to risk a C-130 crew to get Dr. Vasquez and her equipment here. "How significant a threat are we talking about?" he asked. "The kind that makes landing a transport aircraft on a goat path seem like a reasonable risk assessment." Captain Acaffer joined their conversation, having overheard enough to understand that their mission had expanded beyond simple cargo delivery. "Dr. Vasquez, what's our timeline for departure? I can get us airborne, but that landing used up most of our safety margins. I'd prefer not to attempt a nighttime takeoff with any additional weight." "We won't be taking off tonight, Captain. This operation requires us to remain on site for at least 48 hours. Acaffer exchanged glances with Kowalski. Neither of them had been briefed for an extended ground operation, and the valley they occupied was far from secure. Taliban forces operated freely in this region, and the sound of their landing would have been audible for miles. "Ma'am," Kowalski said, 48 hours is a long time to hold this position with a four-man team. We're going to need additional support." "Support is already en route. 2 additional SEAL teams will arrive via helicopter at 300 hours, along with the necessary specialists to complete our objective." As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of rotorcraft began echoing off the valley walls. The first indication that their night was about to become significantly more complicated came from Petty Officer Williams, who was monitoring the southern approach through his rifle scope. "Reaper, I've got movement on the ridgeline. Multiple contacts, maybe 6 or 8 personnel. They're maintaining distance but definitely observing our position." Kowalski activated his radio. "Base, this is Reaper 6. We have possible hostile surveillance of our LZ. Request immediate intelligence update on enemy activity in our area." The response took longer than usual, suggesting that someone at headquarters was consulting higher authorities before answering. When it came, the voice carried additional weight. "Reaper 6, be advised that enemy forces in your area have been unusually active for the past 72 hours. Intelligence suggests they may be aware of your mission objectives." Dr. Vasquez overheard the transmission and moved closer to Kowalski. "Sergeant, it's possible that our intelligence regarding the Soviet assets has been compromised. If hostile forces reach the cache site before we complete our mission, the consequences could be significant." The approaching helicopters resolved into 2 A-60 Black Hawks, their navigation lights visible as they descended toward the northern end of the dirt strip. The lead aircraft touched down first, disgorging 8 additional SEALs who immediately established security positions. The second helicopter carried what appeared to be specialized equipment and 3 personnel in civilian clothes who moved with the purposeful efficiency of intelligence operatives. Captain Acaffer watched the helicopter operations with professional interest, noting how the pilots managed the challenging conditions with skill that matched her own landing approach. The valley provided minimal maneuvering room, and the thin air at altitude reduced rotor efficiency significantly. "Phoenix," called her co-pilot from the cargo bay, "we've got a problem with the number 2 engine. Oil pressure is running low, and I'm seeing metal particles in the filter." Acaffer grimaced. The hard landing had stressed their aircraft beyond normal parameters, and mechanical issues were an inevitable consequence. "How bad is it, Torch?" "Bad enough that I wouldn't want to attempt takeoff without a thorough inspection. and probably some parts we don't have with us. Wonderful, she muttered, then keyed her radio. Reaper 6, Phoenix 27. Be advised, we may be grounded longer than anticipated due to mechanical issues. Kowalski received this information with the stoic acceptance that came from years of operations where nothing proceeded according to plan. Copy, Phoenix. We'll adjust our security posture accordingly. The senior SEAL from the first helicopter approached Kowalski's position. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 15 years in special operations, and his equipment was configured for extended ground operations rather than simple extraction support. Reaper Rodriguez, I'm taking tactical command of the ground element. My team has additional intelligence regarding the objective that changes our operational parameters significantly. Kowalski nodded, recognizing that the mission had escalated beyond his team's original scope. What do we need to know, Chief? The Soviet cache we're here to secure contains more than conventional weapons. Intelligence indicates possible nuclear materials, along with documentation that could compromise ongoing operations throughout the region. Rodriguez paused, ensuring his words carried appropriate weight. We cannot allow these materials to be recovered by hostile forces. Dr. Vasquez approached their position, having completed initial preparations with her equipment. Chief Rodriguez, my team is ready to proceed to the cache site. We'll need security escort and assistance with heavy equipment transportation. Doctor, what exactly are we dealing with at this site? In 1988, Soviet forces established a secure storage facility approximately 2 kilometers from this position. The facility was abandoned during their withdrawal, but recent satellite imagery suggests it has been compromised. We need to inventory remaining materials and either secure or destroy anything that poses a security risk. Rodriguez studied the terrain map on his tablet, noting the elevation changes and potential approach routes to the cache site. The location was defensible, but would require his combined teams to operate in extended formation across challenging ground. Reaper, I want your team to maintain security here at the LZ. My people will escort Dr. Vasquez to the objective. Phoenix, can your crew assist with perimeter security? Captain Akefer nodded. My flight engineer and loadmaster are qualified for ground operations. We can provide additional firepower if necessary. As the teams organized their equipment and prepared to move out, the valley seemed to grow quieter around them. The normal sounds of night in the Afghan mountains, wind through the rocks, distant calls of night birds, the occasional sound of falling stones, created an atmosphere of isolation that reminded everyone how far they were from friendly forces. Williams maintained his watch on the southern ridgeline, where the movement he had detected earlier seemed to have stopped. Through his rifle scope, he could see what appeared to be observation positions, but no obvious hostile activity. Movement's gone static, he reported to Kowalski. They're watching but not advancing. Maybe they're waiting for something, Kowalski mused, then activated his radio. Base, Reaper 6. Request immediate drone coverage of our area. We need eyes on the surrounding terrain. Reaper 6, Base. Drone support is unavailable due to weather conditions over your location. Recommend you rely on organic surveillance capabilities. Kowalski looked up at the clear, star-filled sky and wondered what weather conditions the operations center was referring to. The night was calm, with excellent visibility and minimal wind, unless someone at headquarters knew something about incoming weather that hadn't been shared with ground forces. Or unless someone wanted their operation to proceed without overhead surveillance. The realization that their mission might be more compartmentalized than usual settled over Kowalski like a cold wind from the mountains. Dr. Vasquez's equipment, the Soviet cache, the unusual authorization codes, and now the absence of standard drone support. Everything suggested that normal operational protocols had been suspended for reasons that hadn't been explained to the personnel executing the mission. Chief Rodriguez organized his assault team for movement to the cache site, checking equipment and communications one final time before departing the relative security of the landing zone. Dr. Vasquez and her two assistants carried detection equipment that looked more sophisticated than anything Kowalski had seen in previous operations. Reaper will maintain radio contact every 30 minutes, Rodriguez said. If you don't hear from us within that window, assume we've encountered problems and implement emergency extraction protocols. Understood, Chief. Watch your six out there. The assault team disappeared into the darkness, their night vision equipment and sound discipline making them virtually invisible within minutes of leaving the perimeter. Kowalski repositioned his remaining personnel to provide better coverage of the landing zone, including the disabled C-130 that now represented both an asset and a liability. Captain Akafer approached his position, carrying her sidearm and wearing body armor that made her look more like infantry than aircrew. Sergeant, what's your assessment of our tactical situation? Honestly, Captain, we're in a valley with limited escape routes, questionable communications with higher headquarters, and unknown hostile forces watching our every move. On the positive side, we have good fields of fire and enough ammunition to discourage casual visitors. That's reassuring, she said with dry humor. In flight school, they never covered defensive ground operations in scenarios like this. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how did you end up flying C-130s? Most pilots I know try to avoid cargo duty. Akafer was quiet for a moment, her attention focused on the southern ridgeline where Williams continued his surveillance. I wanted to fly fighters originally. Spent 4 years fighting for the opportunity, proving that I could handle the physical demands and tactical complexity. When I finally got accepted to fighter training, they discovered that I had better spatial awareness and system management skills than average. Those talents made me perfect for transport aircraft instead. That sounds like getting punished for being too good at your job. Maybe, but flying C-130s has taken me to places and situations that fighter pilots never see. Tonight, for example, how many F-16 drivers can say they've landed their aircraft on a dirt strip in the middle of a special operations mission? Kowalski smiled. He was beginning to understand why Captain Akafer had been selected for this particular mission. The ability to land a C-130 on an impossible runway required more than technical skill. It demanded the kind of judgment and adaptability that came from years of operating in uncertain environments. The radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice. Reaper 6, Overwatch 1, we've reached the objective site. Initial assessment indicates the facility has been partially excavated. Recommend you prepare for possible contact with hostile forces. Copy Overwatch 1. What's your estimated time on target? At least 2 hours for complete inventory and security assessment. Be advised, we found evidence of recent activity at this location. Kowalski felt his pulse quicken. Recent activity suggested that someone else was interested in the Soviet cache, and the timing couldn't be coincidental. Their mission had been planned weeks in advance, but intelligence about the cache had apparently reached other parties as well. Williams, any change in that ridgeline surveillance? Negative, Reaper. They're maintaining position, but I count at least 8 personnel now. Looks like they're settling in for extended observation. The situation was developing exactly as Kowalski had feared, multiple parties converging on the same objective. With his team positioned between unknown hostile forces and a critical mission that couldn't be abandoned. Captain Akafer moved to check on her aircraft, where her co-pilot was still assessing the engine damage. The C-130's cargo bay remained open, providing access to their remaining equipment, but also representing a vulnerability that concerned Kowalski. If hostile forces decided to advance on their position, the aircraft would be an obvious target. Phoenix, what's your crew's status? Torch is working on the engine problem, but we're definitely grounded until morning at the earliest. My flight engineer and loadmaster are positioned to provide fire support if necessary. Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Did your mission briefing include any information about the nature of Dr. Vasquez's operation? Akafer hesitated, her expression suggesting internal conflict about how much she should reveal. Sergeant, my orders came directly from Air Force Special Operations Command with minimal mission details. I was told to transport Dr. Vasquez and her equipment to these coordinates, then provide support as required for ground operations. But you suspected this wasn't a routine humanitarian mission. The cargo doesn't match the manifests, the destination isn't on any approved landing zone list, and the authorization codes bypass normal command channels. I've been flying long enough to recognize when a mission involves activities that aren't discussed in regular briefings. Their conversation was interrupted by a transmission from Rodriguez. Reaper 6, Overwatch 1. We've located the cache, and the situation is worse than anticipated. The facility contained enriched uranium and weapons-grade plutonium. Most of the nuclear materials are missing. Kowalski felt ice forming in his stomach. Overwatch 1, say again. Did you say nuclear materials are missing? Affirmative. Dr. Vasquez estimates that approximately 60% of the original materials have been removed, probably within the last 72 hours. We're continuing inventory, but it appears that someone beat us to the objective. The implications hit Kowalski like a physical blow. If hostile forces had recovered weapons-grade nuclear materials, the strategic significance of their mission had just increased exponentially. More immediately, it meant that whoever was watching them from the ridgelines might possess capabilities that his SEAL team was not equipped to handle. Overwatch 1, what's your recommendation for mission completion? We need to secure any remaining materials and determine how much was removed. Dr. Vasquez is working on identification protocols, but this is going to take time we may not have. Captain Akafer had been monitoring the radio traffic, and her expression reflected the same concern that Kowalski felt. Sergeant, if there are nuclear materials involved, shouldn't we be requesting immediate backup? This is beyond what a small special operations team can handle. Ma'am, I agree with you, but our communications with higher headquarters have been limited since we arrived. I'm beginning to think that's not accidental. Williams's voice interrupted their discussion. Reaper, I've got new movement on the eastern approach. Looks like vehicles, maybe 2 or 3. They're maintaining distance, but they're definitely moving in our direction. Kowalski grabbed his rifle and moved to Williams's position. Through his own scope, he could see the faint glow of headlights moving along what appeared to be a goat path that led into their valley. The vehicles were still several kilometers away, but their approach vector would bring them directly to the landing zone. Williams, how much time before they reach our position? At their current speed, maybe 90 minutes, but Reaper, those aren't pickup trucks. They look like military vehicles, possibly armored. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Hostile forces with possible access to nuclear materials were approaching their position, while Rodriguez's team was still 2 hours away from completing their mission at the cache site. Kowalski's options were limited: attempt to delay the approaching vehicles with his small team, or abandon the mission and extract immediately. Neither option was acceptable. Base, this is Reaper 6. We have multiple hostile contacts approaching our position. Request immediate air support and additional ground forces. The radio remained silent for 30 seconds before a different voice responded. Not the operations center personnel who had been handling their communications, but someone with more authority and less patience. Reaper 6, this is Mongoose Actual. Negative on air support. You are directed to complete your mission and extract via scheduled transportation. Acknowledge. Kowalski recognized a direct order when he heard one, but the tactical reality on the ground didn't match the expectations of whoever Mongoose Actual might be. Mongoose Actual, Reaper 6. Be advised, we have confirmed hostile vehicles approaching our LZ and possible nuclear materials involved in our objective. Recommend immediate escalation to higher command levels. Reaper 6, your mission parameters remain unchanged. Complete the objective and extract as planned. Mongoose Actual out. The transmission ended, leaving Kowalski staring at his radio in disbelief. Someone at command level was either unaware of their deteriorating tactical situation or had decided that mission completion was worth the risk to his team's survival. Captain Akafer had monitored the exchange, and her expression reflected his own concerns. Sergeant, who is Mongoose Actual? That's not the same command authority we've been dealing with. I don't know, ma'am, but whoever it is just ordered us to complete a mission that's looking more impossible by the minute. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, echoing off the valley walls in a way that made precise distance estimation difficult. Williams continued tracking their movement through his scope, providing updates every few minutes that painted an increasingly grim picture. Reaper, definite count of 3 vehicles. They've stopped approximately 5 kilometers out, probably conducting reconnaissance of our position. Any idea what kind of vehicles? From this distance, they look like Soviet-era armor. BTR-70s maybe, or something similar. Definitely military rather than civilian. The presence of armored vehicles confirmed Kowalski's worst fears. His team was equipped for special operations against lightly armed insurgents, not for engaging armored threats with crew-served weapons. If the approaching forces decided to advance, his options would be limited to harassment and delay tactics. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio, with an update that made their situation even more complex. Reaper 6, Overwatch 1. Dr. Vasquez has confirmed that weapons-grade plutonium is missing from the cache. She estimates enough material for at least 2 nuclear devices. We're working to secure remaining materials, but this facility has been thoroughly looted. The pieces of the tactical puzzle were beginning to form a picture that explained why their mission had been classified at such high levels. Soviet nuclear materials had been abandoned during the withdrawal from Afghanistan, then recovered by unknown parties who possessed the resources and knowledge to recognize their value. Dr. Vasquez's mission wasn't just inventory and recovery. It was damage assessment for a nuclear security breach that could have global implications. Overwatch 1, how much longer do you need at the cache site? Minimum 90 minutes for complete documentation. Dr. Vasquez wants to ensure we have accurate records of what's missing before we extract. Copy, be advised, we have hostile armor approaching the LZ. You may need to expedite your timeline. Understood. We'll work as fast as possible, but we can't afford to miss anything at this site. Kowalski found himself caught between competing necessities. Protecting his team from immediate threats while ensuring mission completion that could prevent nuclear materials from disappearing permanently into terrorist networks or hostile state actors. Captain Akafer approached his position with her flight engineer, Staff Sergeant Martinez, who carried an M240 machine gun and several belts of ammunition. Sergeant Kowalski, my crew is ready to provide fire support. We've also rigged the C-130 with thermite charges in case we need to deny the aircraft to hostile forces. Ma'am, I appreciate the support, but I need to be honest about our tactical situation. If those vehicles are armored and supported by infantry, we're going to be seriously outgunned. Then we need to be smarter than they are, she replied with quiet determination. What's your assessment of the terrain advantages we can exploit? Kowalski studied the valley through his night vision, considering defensive positions and fields of fire that might compensate for their disadvantage in heavy weapons. The landing zone was positioned in a natural bowl surrounded by rocky ridgelines that could provide cover and concealment. If his team could establish positions in the rocks, they might be able to harass armored vehicles enough to delay their advance. We can establish overlapping fields of fire from the eastern and western ridgelines, he said, pointing to elevated positions that dominated the valley floor. The approaches are limited, so we can channel their movement and engage with crew-served weapons. What about the C-130? Can we use it as a defensive position? Negative. It's too valuable as an extraction asset and too vulnerable to armor-piercing rounds. We'll position our defensive line forward of the aircraft. Williams called out another contact report. Reaper, the vehicles are moving again. They're advancing slowly, probably conducting route reconnaissance. I estimate 45 minutes before they reach effective weapons range. The timeline was compressing rapidly. Rodriguez needed 90 minutes to complete his mission, but hostile forces would reach their position in less than an hour. Kowalski had to make a decision that balanced mission completion against team survival. Overwatch 1, Reaper 6. Be advised, we're about to be engaged by hostile armor. What's your minimum time requirement for critical mission completion? Rodriguez's response carried the weight of someone making life-or-death calculations. Reaper 6, we need at least 60 minutes to document the missing materials and secure the remaining cache. Without that information, we won't know what threats are now in enemy hands. Copy, will buy you the time. Kowalski activated his team frequency. All stations, this is Reaper 6. We're going to implement delaying tactics against approaching armor. Move to positions Alpha through Delta and prepare for extended engagement. The SEAL team began moving to predetermined positions among the rocks, their movements coordinated and efficient despite the stress of impending contact. Captain Okafor and her crew took position near the aircraft, ready to provide supporting fire and protect their extraction asset. As they prepared their defensive positions, the sound of approaching vehicles grew steadily louder, accompanied now by the higher-pitched whine of additional engines that suggested reconnaissance motorcycles or light vehicles. Multiple contacts now, Williams reported. At least 5 vehicles total, with dismounted infantry advancing on foot. They're definitely conducting a coordinated approach. The tactical picture was becoming clearer. Enemy forces were employing combined arms tactics with armor, infantry, and reconnaissance elements working together to secure the valley. This wasn't a random encounter with local insurgents. It was a planned military operation by forces with professional training and equipment. Phoenix, what's your aircraft's defensive capabilities? We're not equipped for ground combat, but we can provide illumination and communications relay. My crew is also qualified with small arms if necessary. Understood. When the engagement starts, I want you to provide battlefield illumination on my command. The enemy has the advantage in numbers and armor, but we control the terrain and have superior night vision. The next 30 minutes passed with agonizing slowness, as both sides maneuvered for advantage.